Well, when you hear the stirring sounds of the alma mater, our dear mother, then you know you're listening to KGNU Radio here in Boulder and on KGNU Radio to the Good Old CU program. And you may or may not know that this is your host, Joe Uhas, and that in this program, which is on third Monday of every month, we talk about higher education in general and the University of Colorado in particular. So, with that very, very brief introduction, I am very, very delighted and privileged to say that I have my guest on today's program, as we say in English, András Tóth, or as we say properly in Hungarian, Tóth András. And András, please introduce yourself to the one or two among our millions of listeners who probably don't already know who you are.
Hi, good to be with you. So I am from Hungary. I'm a Hungarian, which is a former socialist country, now part of the European Union. But now I am currently living in Madrid, in Spain, and I am associate professor at the University or Universidad Europea, so European University in Madrid, and I'm teaching geoeconomics and geopolitics.
Well, there you go. Now you get to teach us a thing or two. Uh, we are recording this program today, so you will not be able to call in live to the studio. On the other hand, you're welcome to get in touch with me at juhaszj at colorado.edu. You know, whatever you would like to say or whatever. Andras, can you give out an email or some contact for yourself?
Yeah, TOTHENDHU at gmail.com.
There
This
you
is
go,
my-
at
I have
gmail.com.
a YouTube channel also, which you can find under my name.
Okay.
We am occasionally giving out you videos about geoeconomics, geopolitics, and the current changes, both
Well,
in Spanish and English. I mean, both my Spanish and English is horrible, but still
all right.
try to
And if
cope.
you want to do it in Hungarian, you can also do it in Hungarian.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, in Spanish?
yeah,
What
also.
else? German?
No, no, no.
No
This
German.
half.
Okay.
I use half of the word more or less already.
Well, the Spanish covers half the world, doesn't it?
Yeah,
The English, the other half, what's left over? The Hungarians. That's it. That's the
yeah,
Hungarian.
Hungarian. Maybe the Chinese.
Well, they all speak
Yeah,
English now.
yeah, yeah,
So, anyway, English has become the universal language. It's not French, it's not Chinese. I think English is the universal language. The streets signs in China that are not in Chinese are in English.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I would like to see what you would like to talk about higher education and ask you questions afterwards, or if you want me to start, that's entirely up to you.
Maybe I begin. So I think all of us who are in, I'm also in higher education as a professor, all of us is before a monumental change. And this is due to solely, I mean, seems to be solely of election of Donald Trump. And it's monumental change which this presidency brings about. We are at the beginning. Actually, it is all, although it related to name of Donald Trump, but the background conflicts goes deeper. First of all, we have a kind of cold civil war between nationalist, conservative, right, and and globalist, progressive, left. And in this civil war, higher education is on the globalist, progressive left side, especially human studies, including economics. And there is an increasing tension in between these two very strong, almost religious belief. And more or less in every Western society, the educated elite is on the progressive left, more or less. And because half of the population now goes to university, it means more or less half of the population. And the other half, who are not educated in the university system, I mean, there is always individual cases, but it's a very broad picture, is in the nativist conservative right. And in the recent years, the division between the two became so big that we are almost a civil war-like situation, especially in the United States. Partially the election of Donald Trump due to this extreme hatred between the two camps. And maybe you may, I'm not American, but how I see and reading the American news, Biden went, although Biden has campaigned being a kind of middle class Joe, but in reality he represented during his presidency the extreme left, which gave space to Donald Trump to mobilize the nativist camp. I mean, his signature event in his elections campaign when he appeared as a hamburger flip-flopper in a McDonald's, which was one of the biggest media stunt in my life, and probably which gained him the presidency. It was a major pivotal event in the elections campaign, we all remember. Now, this internal civil war is connected to another thing which is we have to understand, which is very important. That since Bretton Woods, which was in 1944, the end of the Second World War, the world shifted to the US dollar standard. The US dollar is not only the internal money of the United States, but the money of the world trade. And every other currency, all other countries' currencies are pyramided, built on the US dollar reserves. This gave the United States an extraordinary benefit. It hadn't to care about anymore about competitiveness, industry. The only major export good of the United States is the US dollar, which not even has to print. So even though they don't need printing presses, it is created by nowadays electronically. The computers could be anywhere. What is important that somebody is, and only the US could create US dollar. For this reason, the US has created a bubble for itself. It is like an shadow, it has like an empire, and this empire center of a shadow empire built not only on military force, but on the force of the US dollar. And this created to create a bubble, an extraordinary good life in the United States, because the US government could do anything, whatever it wants. It always could trade US dollar for real goods. Now, this led to the internal weakening of the United States, the industrialization, and the disappearing of industries and the rise of the state and the service sectors. Now, the US education system, especially the university system, went to serve this government and service sector. So if you see what is the relationship, not only that half of the youngsters go to universities nowadays, but majority of them is going to learn not so-called STEM, so engineering and physics and chemics, which is necessary for industrial production, but kind of humanities and kind of human related studies related sciences like marketing, PR, history, and so on, sociology, law, economics,
Economics.
and so on. And this created a major distortion. If you look at the statistics, I mean, it's amazing that Iran, which is a dirt poor country, has more engineering students in tertiary education than the United States. Russia has more. China has enormous amount of STEM universities. So they are becoming industrial powerhouses, especially China, which went through an amazing development. In 2000, it has 4% of the production of industrial output of the world. And today it has more than one third of the world output. I think 34 or 33%. So within not one generation, about 35 years, less than a generation, it became an industrial superpower, which was the United States after the Second World War in the 50s, or Great Britain, United Kingdom, in the 18th, during the 19th century when UK was the home of the industrial revolutions. Now, this created an enormous trouble for the United States because China is not part of this kind of Western thought system. It is not a Christian liberal Western society. It has its own worldview, completely independent from us. And it has a major historical problem with the West, that it was a kind of semi-colonial status during the 19th century. And it's liberated itself. And it's not, couldn't thank its liberation to like Germany or Japan to the American power against the Soviet Union, but kind of complete independent development. So because of this, China is not integrated into the Western system in a hierarchical manner, but in coalition with Russia and Iran, representing a different bloc. Now, the
Excuse me
Ukraine,
for interrupting. Pardon me.
yeah,
Uh,
sorry.
we- we're about halfway through, so I just
Yep.
quickly want to say this is the good old CU radio show on KGNU Radio. I am Joe Uhas, your host. We're talking about higher education and the pressures it's on in the chaos of the uh, first half of the 21st century and the impact of the American higher education on the world and vice versa. My guest is Andras Tot, who is a professor at the European University in Madrid. And you can get in touch with me at juhascj at colorado.edu, in as much as this program today is being recorded on Easter Sunday, namely yesterday. Andras, a quick uh, email address from you.
TOTHANDHU dot at gmail.com. So
So
go
sorry
back to
for.
higher education. So this means that Trump decided to solve this problem. This is why he introduced these enormous taxes, custom walls, enormous to destroy China and its allies. Now, this also means that it may destroy the US bubble as a consequence, because we are not anymore in the 19th century. Yeah, it's not anymore full products are produced in each country and exchange, but we have supply chains of multinationals. And half of the American industrial production is based on small parts, which is produced in China and assembled in the US. So we are facing with an enormous crisis. Possibly bigger crisis. We are facing this possibly is a bigger crisis than was the 1929-33 crisis. Possibly. Because we are living in a different world, and the American president is employing a crude measure to destroy China, which could have the impact of destroying all economies of the world. And this is impacting the higher education because if you have a state crisis, a debt crisis, collapse of industrial production, collapse of consumption, debt crisis, then you don't have any more money for the universities. This crisis with the internal civil war against the left dominated, especially social sciences. We are in front of a situation when the external crisis metasizing into an internal civil war, real civil war, not called civil war, but an internal real civil war, which could have different, is not mean that it would be a civil war, but kind of civil war-like situations. We are in an enormously difficult and dangerous situation, and I'm very afraid of what will happen with us in the United States, which is the key country in the world because of the US dollar and because its enormous power, and all other countries which are dependent of having enough US dollar because their economic model is export oriented development. This is why Germany, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all countries which are part of the allied system of the United States are exporting to the US, has an export surplus. Why? Because this is they get US dollar on which they have their own currencies. And once Trump stops the flow out of US dollar without changing the monetary system, these countries, the very allies of the United States, would enter into major crisis. So not only China will collapse, probably, by the key allies of the United States will collapse, and the US also. So Trump created a perfect storm, a perfect storm, a perfect storm, which I think in the much dangerous than you can read on the everyday press.
And in a sense, the situation you describe makes me think of my days as a young man in the 60s, where the universities were the front line of a similar civil war between two factions in the world and two factions in the United States. I think Harvard is now the identified enemy, and the American higher education system is presently constructed in terms of quote unquote the past has become the front line of the American Civil War.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it is the civil war is by persons represented in one hand by the highly educated professional guest,
All the
university
same,
professor. These are who are writing the op-eds, the articles, educating the new elite. the new political and business elite, who are also, because of this, they have this kind of leftist viewpoint. And also, these are who don't have impact on those who don't go to the university system, who are who are served by Trump in the McDonald's first by hamburgers. Exactly this election stunt described the sociological division within the American society, and also this is true in Europe, where I am based on.
So we've got about 2 minutes left for you to wrap up. Let me just very quickly again give my email address, juhaszj at colorado.edu, if you would do the same.
TOTHANDHU at gmail.com, and then I have a YouTube channel on my name. As a wrap up, the most important thing, because we are living in a very complex world, if you want a reform of the world, you need to have peace in the kind of big conference, how it was Bretton Woods, to recreate a new monetary system between the major stakeholders of the world: United States, Europe, China, Russia, Japan, Australia, and so on. Not too much, because if there's too much countries there, you just couldn't get anything. The 10 most important countries. And they have to create a monetary system which does not have this internal imbalance, which is allowing the US have a bubble, but each country has to have the same trade balance. Then the US will be naturally or automatically reindustrialized, because it will feel the competitive pressure, which now it doesn't feel. And then the US also, to solve his own internal problems, moderation. This is the most important thing.
Well,
Avoid
on
extremism. This is the most important thing, because not you are in civil war. And once you survive the civil war like me, because socialism was a kind of civil war, you always say it's better to be in the middle.
well, I thank you very much on that. This is Joe Juhas saying goodbye for this edition of Good Old CU. And I'm very, very much in debt to Andras Boy. The points you raise point directly at the University of Colorado and its role in the state and in the world. And I thank you very, very much once again.
Thanks very much.